The alien princess had been called barren all her life. But when the war reached her father's palace, a human soldier walked in and promised her an heir. No one believed him, not the king, not the guards, not even the princess herself. But in the next few hours he would break a curse older than the empire and bind two worlds together forever, and the king would be furious about the heir. The first shot is about to be fired, and the fate of the galaxy will change. Make sure you're with us for every moment. Like, subscribe, and let's step into the story. The first blast came without warning. It was a sound that tore the skies apart, a roar so deep it shook the bones of every living thing. The capital of the Zareth Empire had been at peace for centuries. Markets were full, ships floated in. The sky lanes and the great crystal towers reflected the soft light of their twin suns. But that morning, the peace ended. The humans had arrived. No one in the Zareth Empire thought humans were a threat. They were new to the stars, fragile compared to the armored warriors of other species. But they fought differently. They did not wait for permission. They did not follow the silent rules of alien diplomacy. And they never stopped until they won. The war began on the outer colonies. First, small skirmishes. Then, entire fleets clashing in the void. Soon, the fighting reached the Zareth homeworld itself. In the great throne hall, Princess Larina stood beside her father, the Zareth king. She was tall and graceful, with pale emerald skin and hair like flowing sea glass. Her eyes were sharp, but there was a shadow in them, the shadow of the one thing she could never give her people. She could not bear an heir. For years, this secret was kept from the public. Only the king and his closest advisors knew. For the royal bloodline, this was a curse. A princess without an heir meant a weak future for the empire. And now, with war at their gates, the king felt the weight of it heavier than ever. "Father," Larina said softly, watching the holographic display of human ships breaking through their defense line. "If they reach the capital, they will not." The king cut her off, his deep voice echoing in the hall. But even he could not hide the strain in his eyes. The heavy doors swung open. A warrior, tall and broad-shouldered, stepped inside. His armor was blackened from battle, and a strange silver emblem glowed on his chest. The guards tensed. The king's hand moved toward his sword. It was a human, not just any human. A soldier with a calm, steady gaze, his uniform torn, his helmet under his arm. He walked forward slowly, unarmed, as if the dozens of spears pointed at him didn't exist. "My name is Elias Kane," he said in a steady voice. "I've come to end this war." The king's laughter was cold. "One human thinks he can stop a war between worlds?" Elias didn't look at the king. His eyes were fixed on the princess. For a moment, the throne hall felt too small, too quiet. "I didn't come for you," Elias said to the king. "I came for her." The guards reacted instantly, weapons raised, but Larina lifted a hand. Something in his tone, not threat, but certainty, made her speak before her father could. "And why?" she asked carefully. "Would a human come for me?" Elias stepped closer, his boots ringing on the polished floor. "Because you are the key to peace. And I have a gift for you that no one else can give." The hall went still. Even the king seemed frozen, his eyes narrowing. "What gift?" Larina asked, though she could feel her father's glare on her. "A future," Elias said simply. "An heir." Gasps filled the throne room. Every Zareth warrior shifted uneasily. The king's face turned to stone. "You speak dangerous words, human," the king growled. "I speak the truth," Elias replied. "And if you hear me out, your empire will survive. If you don't, this war will burn your world to dust." For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the distant hum of the palace, shields straining under the pressure of the human fleet outside. Finally, the king rose from his throne. the metal plates of his armor catching the cold light. "You will explain yourself," he sighed. Now, Elias's gaze didn't waver. "The humans didn't start this war. We finished what your allies began. And I didn't come here to destroy your people. I came here because the princess deserves more than to be a symbol of what she cannot do. I can change that." Larena's heart pounded. No one had ever spoken to her like this. The king's voice was low and dangerous. "You claim you can give my daughter an heir?" Elias nodded. "I don't claim, I promise." The silence that followed felt like the air before a lightning strike. The king's eyes burned with fury, but there was something else, something he would never admit aloud. Hope. And that was when the second blast hit the city, shaking the crystal towers and plunging the throne hall into flickering shadows. The war had just reached their door. The throne hall shook again as the second blast echoed through the city. Dust drifted down from the high vaulted ceiling. Far above, glowing crystal lamps swayed. Outside, the muffled roar of battle grew louder. The guards moved to shield the king and Princess Larena, but Elias Kane stood where he was, calm, unmoving, as if the chaos outside didn't matter. "You have moments before your palace falls," Elias said, his voice steady. "If you waste them arguing, the war will decide for you." The king's hands curled into fists. He was a ruler used to command, not to be told what to do, especially by a human. "You think I will hand my daughter to you?" the king said, his voice low and dangerous. "I think," Elias replied, "that you care more about your empire than your pride." The words stung, and the tension in the hall rose. Several guards shifted, ready to attack the human soldier, but Larena lifted her hand again. Her eyes studied Elias, searching for the lie, the trick, the hidden threat. There was none. Only certainty. "What are you offering?" she asked. Elias looked at her, not at her father, not at the throne, but at her. "Peace and an heir. The war can end if our bloodlines join. Your enemies will hesitate to strike if the princess of Zareth carries the child of a human war hero." Gasps filled the room again. The words were bold, dangerous, almost unthinkable. The king stepped forward, his armored boots ringing on the stone floor. "You speak as if my daughter is a weapon for you to use." "She's not a weapon," Elias said calmly. "She's the future, and without her, your empire has none." The king's eyes burned with fury, but his silence spoke louder. Larena felt it too, the quiet truth hiding under his anger. For years, her life had been a cage made of duty and shame. She had faced whispers, pity, and the quiet disappointment in her father's eyes. But now, standing before her was a man who looked at her differently. Not as a symbol of failure, but as a key to something greater. The distant thunder of explosions shook the floor again. Outside, the shields of the palace flared bright against incoming fire. Finally, the king spoke. "And if I refuse?" Elias's expression didn't change. "Then your enemies will breach these walls, and your throne will burn. The choice is yours." Silence stretched between them. The hall seemed to hold its breath. At last, the king turned to Larena. His voice was quieter now, but heavy with meaning. "You understand what he is asking?" She nodded. "Yes, and you accept." Her gaze flickered to Elias. The human soldier stood tall, unafraid, his eyes locked on hers as if the rest of the hall didn't exist. "I will decide," she said, "after I hear what you are not telling me." For the first time, Elias's calm broke, just a fraction. He took a slow breath. "There's a reason I can promise you an heir," he said. "Something the king will not like." The king's armor creaked as he moved forward. "Speak, human." Elias glanced between father and daughter. "Your people believe humans are weak compared to Zareth. But in one way, we are stronger. Our bodies adapt fast, faster than yours, even to bloodlines, even to curses." Larena's breath caught. She understood. "You mean," she began. Elias nodded. I can break what's holding you back, but it must be done soon. And it will. Bind us together, forever. The king's hands tightened on the hilt of his sword. You speak like a man making threats. I'm offering survival, Elias said. You can call it what you want. Another blast struck outside, closer this time. The sound of shouting. Warriors and clashing weapons echoed down the corridors. The king looked at his daughter, then at the human soldier. Rage, fear, and something else, reluctant calculation, flickered in his eyes. Finally, he spoke one sentence that silenced. The entire hall, if you fail. You will die before the sun sets. Elias didn't flinch. Then I suggest you give me the chance to succeed. Larina stepped down from the dais, her footsteps echoing. She stopped in front of him, so close she could see the faint scars across his cheek. Then we will see, she said softly, if the human's promise is worth the cost. And outside, the enemy's final assault began. The palace corridors trembled as the battle outside pushed closer. From the high windows, flashes of light cut through the thick haze, bursts from energy cannons and the sharp, twisting trails of missiles. The air inside was heavy with tension. Every guard on edge, every shadow carrying the threat of invasion. Elias walked beside Princess Larina, flanked by 2 armored Zareth soldiers. The king followed at a measured distance, his gaze fixed on the human like a predator studying prey. No one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the palace shields, a reminder that their time was running out. They reached a small council chamber deep within the palace. The walls were lined with silver-etched panels depicting the long history of the Zareth royal line. Victories, coronations, oaths sworn under the twin suns. At the far end stood a table of black stone, polished so perfectly it reflected the 3 figures standing around it. The king broke the silence first. If you claim you can give my daughter an heir, then you will prove it. Not with promises, not with words. His voice was low, dangerous, but edged with something Elias recognized, curiosity. Elias rested his hands on the table. I didn't come here to beg for your trust. I came because your people need a future. And the only way to prove I can give that is to begin. Larina's eyes searched his face. You speak with such certainty. But why me? Why risk this for a princess of a people your kind are fighting? Elias hesitated for a fraction of a second, then spoke. Because I've seen what's coming. This war isn't just between humans and Zareth. Something worse is moving in the dark. If our people remain divided, we will both fall. But if we are bound by blood, by a shared heir, neither side can afford to destroy the other. Her expression softened, but only slightly. She had grown up surrounded by politics, by pretty words wrapped around ugly truths. And you expect me to believe this is only about peace? Elias didn't look away. No, it's also about you. You've been told your whole life what you can't be. I can change that. The king's hand slammed down on the table, making the stone shudder. Enough riddles. Either you act, or you leave this palace in chains. Outside, another explosion rattled the chamber. The lights flickered, casting the room into brief shadows before stabilizing again. Elias leaned forward, his voice quiet but firm. Then here is my offer. I will stand beside the princess, not as a conqueror, not as an enemy, but as her mate. In return, the humans withdraw from your world, and you end the war. The king's eyes narrowed into sharp lines. And if you fail to give her an heir, then I will not live to see another sunrise, Elias replied without hesitation. The chamber went silent. Larina stepped closer to him, her long emerald hair brushing against the cold metal of his armor. You're not afraid of what my father will do to you? She asked. Elias's mouth curved into the faintest hint of a smile. I've been in worse places than this, and none of them had you in them. The king turned away sharply, but not before Larina noticed the flicker in his eyes, a silent recognition that the human's words had struck something deep. Finally, the king spoke, his voice like steel. "Very well. We will see if your blood can do what you claim. But if you bring shame to this court, I will see your head on a pike before the next moonrise." Elias nodded. "Then we have an agreement." As the king left the chamber, Larina remained for a moment longer, her gaze locked on Elias. There was no trust between them yet, but there was something else, a dangerous, undeniable curiosity. Outside, the roar of the battle grew louder. The enemy was almost at the gates, and somewhere in the shadows, unseen by all, another force was already watching, waiting for the moment to strike. The first cracks in the palace shields sounded like distant thunder. From the high towers came the deep, mournful hum of warning gongs, echoing across the capital. The city outside burned in streaks of orange and blue, each explosion sending tremors through the marble floors. The war had finally reached the king's doorstep. Elias stood with Princess Larina on the palace balcony, watching the chaos unfold. Zareth fighters swirled in tight formations, trying to push back the enemy ships that moved like blades through the smoke. Below, the streets were choked with civilians fleeing toward the mountains, their glowing banners clutched tightly and trembling. "Hands, this will not hold," Elias said quietly, his eyes scanning the sky. Larina glanced at him. "You speak as if you've seen this before." "I have," he replied. "Different world. Same ending." The balcony doors burst open as a Zareth commander rushed in, his silver armor scorched and smoking. "Your Majesty!" he shouted to the king, who had just entered the room. "The eastern gates are breached. The enemy has landed troops inside the city." The king's jaw tightened. "Hold them at the inner wall. Burn every street between. Here and there if you must." The commander saluted and left without another word. Elias stepped forward. "You can't win this by burning your own city. You need to pull back your forces and fortify the palace." The king's glare could have cut through steel. "You think I need a human to tell me how to defend my world?" Elias didn't flinch. "I think you need someone who isn't afraid to tell you the truth. This battle is already lost. You can either survive it or die with your pride." The room went still. The king's guards shifted uneasily, waiting for an order that would see Elias dragged out and executed. But instead, the king turned to his daughter. "What do you say, Larina?" She met Elias's eyes, and for the first time, there was no hesitation in her voice. "I say we listen to him." The king's jaw worked in silent frustration, but he gave the order. "Pull all forces back to the palace grounds. Seal the gates." Moments later, the distant roar of battle began to shift. Zareth troops fell back, the sound of their retreat mingling with the shouts of advancing enemy soldiers. Elias knew it was only a matter of time before the palace itself became a battlefield. As the king left to oversee the defense, Larina remained beside Elias. "You risk your life every time you speak to him like that," she said softly. Elias glanced at her, a faint smile touching his lips. "If I'm going to die here, it won't be because I stayed quiet." Before she could answer, the lights above them flickered, not from the battle outside, but from something deeper in the palace. A strange hum filled the air, low and steady, like the heartbeat of a machine. Larina froze. "That sound, it's coming from the vault." "The vault?" Elias asked. She nodded slowly. "The place where the royal line keeps what cannot be destroyed." Elias's eyes narrowed. "Or what should have been destroyed a long time ago." Somewhere in the distance, an explosion shook the ground, but neither of them moved. For a moment, it felt as if the real danger wasn't outside the palace walls at all, but waiting in the shadows beneath their feet. The first cracks in the palace shields sounded like distant thunder. From the high towers came the deep, mournful hum of warning gongs, echoing across the capital. The city outside burned in streaks of orange and blue, each explosion sending tremors through the marble floors. The war had finally reached the king's doorstep. Elias stood with Princess Larina on the palace balcony, watching the chaos unfold. Zareth fighters swirled in tight formations, trying to push back the enemy ships that moved like blades through the smoke. Below, the streets were choked with civilians fleeing toward the mountains, their glowing banners clutched tightly and trembling. "Hands, this will not hold," Elias said quietly, his eyes scanning the sky. Larina glanced at him. "You speak as if you've seen this before." "I have," he replied. "Different world. Same ending." The balcony doors burst open as a Zareth commander rushed in, his silver armor scorched and smoking. "Your Majesty!" he shouted to the king, who had just entered the room. "The eastern gates are breached. The enemy has landed troops inside the city." The king's jaw tightened. "Hold them at the inner wall. Burn every street between. Here and there if you must." The commander saluted and left without another word. Elias stepped forward. "You can't win this by burning your own city. You need to pull back your forces and fortify the palace." The king's glare could have cut through steel. "You think I need a human to tell me how to defend my world?" Elias didn't flinch. "I think you need someone who isn't afraid to tell you the truth. This battle is already lost. You can either survive it or die with your pride." The room went still. The king's guards shifted uneasily, waiting for an order that would see Elias dragged out and executed. But instead, the king turned to his daughter. "What do you say, Larina?" She met Elias's eyes, and for the first time, there was no hesitation in her voice. "I say we listen to him." The king's jaw worked in silent frustration, but he gave the order. "Pull all forces back to the palace grounds. Seal the gates." Moments later, the distant roar of battle began to shift. Zareth troops fell back, the sound of their retreat mingling with the shouts of advancing enemy soldiers. Elias knew it was only a matter of time before the palace itself became a battlefield. As the king left to oversee the defense, Larina remained beside Elias. "You risk your life every time you speak to him like that," she said softly. Elias glanced at her, a faint smile touching his lips. "If I'm going to die here, it won't be because I stayed quiet." Before she could answer, the lights above them flickered, not from the battle outside, but from something deeper in the palace. A strange hum filled the air, low and steady, like the heartbeat of a machine. Larina froze. "That sound, it's coming from the vault." "The vault?" Elias asked. She nodded slowly. "The place where the royal line keeps what cannot be destroyed." Elias's eyes narrowed. "Or what should have been destroyed a long time ago." Somewhere in the distance, an explosion shook the ground, but neither of them moved. For a moment, it felt as if the real danger wasn't outside the palace walls at all, but waiting in the shadows beneath their feet. The light swallowed the chamber. It was not just brightness. It was warmth, sound, and memory all at once, a rush of voices and images that poured through Elias's mind. He saw the rise and fall of empires, the birth of the Zareth bloodline, and the moment it was cursed so no heir would be born without the bond of the first blood. The vessel pulsed violently under his touch, as if testing him, pressing into every corner of his mind. And then, it found what it wanted. Elias felt the other bond awaken inside him, the one he had carried for years from a war far away, when a dying alien queen had given him part of her life essence to save his own. It was that ancient thread, alien and human fused together, that the first blood recognized. The vessel's light burst outward, wrapping around Larina like a living ribbon. She gasped, her knees buckling, but Elias caught her before she fell. The glow seeped into her skin, and for the first time in her life, the bond accepted her. The king stepped forward, eyes wide with disbelief. "Impossible." Elias turned to him, still holding Larina steady. "It's done. The bloodline is whole again." Above them, the thunder of battle shifted. The enemy's assault was slowing, their movements uncertain. Word was already spreading through the city. The princess's curse was broken, and with it the symbol of weakness that had driven their enemies to strike. But the king's face did not soften. His voice was low, heavy with the weight of what had just happened. You have given my daughter an heir, human. But in doing so, you have tied my throne to yours. Elias didn't look away. That was always the point. The king's eyes burned with a storm of emotions, pride, anger, and something like reluctant respect. He turned to Lorena, who was still catching her breath. Do you accept this bond? She met Elias's gaze, her voice steady despite the rush of everything that had happened. Yes, not because of the war, but because he saw me as more than what I could not be. The king closed his eyes for a long moment, then nodded once. Then so be it. The war ends today. But remember, human, the heir you have given us belongs to two worlds, and both will demand its loyalty. Outside, the palace bells began to ring. The enemy ships withdrew into the sky, their weapons silent. The people poured into the streets, cheering the survival of the royal line. Elias and Lorena stood together on the balcony, watching the smoke drift away from the city. The air still carried the scent of fire and metal, but for the first time in weeks, there was no sound of war. You've changed everything, she said quietly. Elias glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Good. That was the idea. Far beyond the clouds, in the deep dark between the stars, another fleet waited, the one Elias had warned about, the one no one had seen yet. And when it came, the heir of two worlds would be the only hope for both. But for now, peace had come.